visited some friends on the island of Malta in the Mediterranean in the mid-1930s. One afternoon, 6 of us decided to hire a car and visit some of the many historical tourist attractions on the island. One of our parties suggested that since the weather was very hot, our best bet was to visit some of the caves and underground temples. At least there we could keep cool for a few hours. Some few miles out of Valletta, the capital of Malta, is the little town of Paula. It has only one main street, Saflieni, and on this is the entrance to an underground temple known as the Hypogaeum of Saflieni. We stopped here and sought out the guide for a tour of the cave or catacomb of Hypogaeum. There was a fairly large cave entrance with ancient mural decorations of whorls and wavy lines, diamond patches here and there, also oval patterns, seemingly painted with red ochre. The entrance itself smelt damp and moldy, but inside the cave there was not a trace of mustiness. Joe, the guide, told us there were 3 floors of underground rooms and gave each of us a lighted candle. One by one, we bent down low to walk through a narrow passage which led to a step or two, and again we were able to stand up in a fair-sized room which had been built out of the Malta sandstone eons ago in the Stone Age. Joe told of a powerful oracle or wishing well deep down, and how it had worked wonders in the old days for the initiated who knew the correct sound to use. I think the oracle still works today unless it was damaged. Malta was heavily bombarded during World War II. The oracle was supposed to work only if a male voice called to it, but as the guide was saying this, I slipped down a small step and gave a yell that was picked up by something and magnified throughout the whole cave.
Tombs, certainly, but also ritual spaces that mirror the above-ground shrines. Living people were using these spaces. Low sound echoing back and amplifying itself can do very strange things, changing tone and volume almost as if it were a living thing. The resonance can actually be felt in various parts of the body. Some people find this is unnerving, disconcerting. For others, it's quite thrilling, much like the effect that we find people creating with subwoofers in their cars. Closed in a stone chamber, a constant tone created by a voice or musical instrument like a shell horn or drum would bounce or echo between the walls, seeming to come from all directions. If it were the right pitch or note, with the sound vibrating at exactly the right frequency, it would also create something called a standing wave. It must have been magical to hear these noises coming from the stone itself, as if it were the earth speaking, or perhaps the voices of the ancestors. Even today, it creates an atmosphere that is ripe for meditation, autosuggestion, or hypnosis.
There's a natural desire of people to have altered states of consciousness. People were able to find and access these altered states through the acoustic properties of these megalithic structures.
We followed the guide through some more narrow passages which led down, 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 then straightened our backs again when we came into another room. In this large opening was a circular stone table or altar in the center of the room. Cut out of the rock walls around were layers of stone beds or resting places of some kind, with hollows scooped out for the head, body, and narrowing to the feet. I guess there were places for adults about 4 feet tall with smaller scooped out beds. It looked like mother, father, and child either slept or were buried here, although we saw no bodies here. Down, down, down again, stooping and crawling through a narrow passage into another large room with slits or narrow openings in the stone wall. They buried their dead here, said the guide. I peered through a slit and saw skeletons. Through another slit I peered into a cave where the guide said they kept their prisoners. A 3-foot thick stone door about 4 feet high and 4 feet wide guarded the entrance. What kind of people and how strong were these pygmies to be able to carve out these rooms to a definite pattern and to move doors this thick and heavy, I thought. This is the end of the tour, Joe, the guide said. We must now turn and retrace our steps. What's down there? I asked. Before turning, I noticed another opening off one of the walls. Go there at your own risk, he replied, and you won't go far. I was all for more exploring and talking it over with my friends. 3 of them decided to go with me, and 2 waited with the guide. I was wearing a long sash around my dress, and since I decided to lead the group, I asked the next one behind me to hold on to it. Holding our half-burnt candles, the 4 of us ducked into this passage, which was narrower and lower than the others. Groping and laughing our way along, I came out first onto a ledge pathway about 2 feet wide with a sheer drop-off of about 50 feet or more on my right and a wall on my left. I took a step forward, close to the rock wall side. The person behind me, still holding on to my sash, had not yet emerged from the passage. Thinking it was quite a drop, and perhaps I should go no further without the guide, I held up my candle. There, across the cave, from an opening deep below me, emerged 20 persons of giant stature. In single file, they walked along a narrow ledge. Their height I judged to be about 20 or 25 feet, since their heads came about halfway up the opposite wall. They walked very slowly, taking long strides. Then they all stopped, turned, and raised their heads in my direction. All simultaneously raised their arms, and with their hands beckoned me. The movement was something like snatching or feeling for something, as the palms of their hands were face down. Terror rooted me to the spot. Go on, we're all getting stuck in the passage. My friend jerked at my sash. What's the matter? Well, there's nothing much to see, I stammered, taking another step forward. My candle was in my right hand. I put my left hand on the wall to steady me and stopped again. My hand wasn't on cold rock, but on something soft and wet. As it moved, a strong gust of wind came from nowhere and blew out my candle. Now I was really scared in the darkness. Go back, I yelled to the others. Go back, guide me back by my sash. My candle was gone out and I cannot see. In utter panic, I backed into the narrow little passageway and forced the others back until we had backed into the large room where Joe and my friends were waiting. What a relief that was. Well, did you see anything? Asked one of them. No, I quickly replied. There was a draft in there that blew out my candle. Let's go, said Joe, the guide. I looked up at him. Our eyes met, and I knew at that one moment in time he had seen what I had seen. There was an expression of caution in his eyes, adding to my reluctance to tell anyone. I decided not to. Out in the open again, and in the hot Malta sunshine, we thanked the guide, and as we tipped him, he looked at me. If you are really interested in exploring further, it would be wise to join a group. There's a school teacher who is going to take a party exploring soon, he said. I left my address with him and asked him to have the school teacher get in touch with me, but I never heard any more about it until one of my friends called me to read an item from the Valletta paper. I say, Lois, remember that tunnel you wanted to explore? It says here in the paper that a schoolmaster and 30 students went exploring, and apparently they got as far as we did. They were roped together, and the end of the rope was tied to the opening of the cave. As the last student turned the corner, where your candle blew out, the rope was cut clean, and none of the party was found because the walls caved in. The shock of this information didn't change my determination not to say anything about my experience in the Hypogaeum. But several months later, my sister visited Malta and insisted on making a tour of the underground temple on Saflieni. Reluctantly, I went along, retracing the same route, but there was a different guide this time. When we got down to the lowest level, the room where I had taken off to explore the tunnel, the entrance was boarded up. Wasn't it here that the schoolmaster and the 30 students got trapped? I asked the guide. Perhaps, he replied with a non-committal shrug of his shoulders and refused to say anything more. You cannot get a thing out of these Maltese when they don't want to talk. You are new here, aren't you? I asked him. Where's Joe, the guy who was here a couple of months ago? I don't know any Joe, he shook his head. I alone have been showing people around these catacombs for years. Who was this guy and why did Joe disappear after we left Saflieni that first time? And why is it impossible to get any facts on the disappearing school children? In 1960, Louise Becker, New York SIB treasurer, visited Malta during her European trip. She searched old newspaper files and a museum, trying to get some facts to substantiate my story, but in vain. The Maltese are tight-lipped about the secrets of their island. Your editor's third lecture, Flying Saucers and America's Destiny, contains brief references to the cavern world and the interior of the Earth. And it was after hearing this talk to her New York saucer group that Miss Jessup told Mrs. Crabbe and me the Malta experience described above. We spent 2 days with Lois Jessup during our Eastern trip in April 1960 and found her a charming hostess, cosmopolitan as a much-traveled Englishwoman can be, and a student of the borderland. Lois has a level head, level-eyed way of looking at life and people, which is very refreshing. Nevertheless, I found her Malta story difficult to believe until Mrs. Crabbe and I returned home and I had a chance to look up Malta at the San Diego Library. 2 Malta articles in the National Geographic are especially fruitful for the underground researcher. Griffith's Malta Halting Place of Nations, May 1920, and Walter's Wanderers of Will in Malta, August 1940, pages 267-272. Walters and another young American friend made a leisurely bicycle tour of Malta in 1939, with plenty of time to get acquainted and to ride around with island teenagers. They visited House Saflieni too, and proved the startling amplifying power of the Oracle. They also picked up this sad information from their Maltese friend. Years ago, one could walk underground from one end of Malta to the other, but all entrances were closed by the government because of a tragedy. On a sightseeing trip comparable to a nature study tour in our own schools, a number of elementary children and their teachers descended into the tunnel maze and did not return. For weeks, mothers declared that they heard wailing and screaming from underground, but numerous excavations and searching parties brought no trace of the lost souls. After 3 weeks, they were finally given up for dead. Griffith noted a hollow-sounding floor in one of the rooms of House Saflieni, indicating yet unexplored lower levels. He also gives a few facts which back up Richard Schaefer's contention that the Dirus, the evil cavern dwellers, are cannibals and enjoy eating human flesh. House Saflieni was discovered in 1902, but before the Valletta Museum director could open it up for the tourists, dirt, broken pottery, and enough normal-sized human bones to account for 33,000 people had to be removed from the rooms of the Hypogaeum. Archaeologists and other innocents believe that the catacombs, like House Saflieni, were burial tombs. I rather think it was a cavern restaurant for the degenerate, undersized descendants of the Atlanteans who were forced into the caves thousands of years ago. Here is Griffith's description of the oracle in the cave. At about the level of a man's mouth is a hemispherical hole in the wall about 2 feet in diameter. Here it was noticed only a few months ago that any word spoken into this place was magnified 100-fold and audible throughout the entire structure. A curved projection is especially carved out of the back of the cave near this hole and acts as a sounding board, showing that the designers had a good knowledge of sound wave motion. The impression upon the credulous can be imagined when the oracle spoke and the words came thundering forth through the dark and mysterious places with terrifying impressiveness. Giants in the earth. Lois Jessup was reminded of the peculiar appearance of the 20-foot giants she saw in House Saflieni by a couple of 35mm slide illustrations in my number 4 saucer lecture concerned with mediumship. These slides are copies of Max Heindel's drawings of the human aura from his book Cosmo Conception, curved lines radiating out beyond the body. Of the huge cavern dwellers she saw, she said their coverings seemed to be like long white hair, combed downward and shaggy looking. Their heads were oval and elongated at the chin and top, and their hair on their heads fell about their shoulders like a draped monk's coil. Now these underground beings, whatever their origin, have no resemblance to Schaefer's Dirus. At least we have the fact of their existence, and in this experience of Lois Jessup's and in the House Saflieni material in National Geographic's, we do have some of the best factual support of the Schaefer mystery your editor has yet seen. In fact, It was this material which encouraged me to go ahead and put together talk number 5, The Reality of the Underground, including a portion of Mrs. Jessup's experience and a review of Schaeffer's basic theories as spelled out by Ray Palmer in the early Mystic magazines back in 1954 and 1955. My basic premise is that there are many different races in the interior of the Earth, of all shapes, sizes, and colors, and of different degrees of density, depending on what level of plane or vibration is normal to them. Along with our former director, Meade Lane, I believe that some of these underground races can shift back and forth across the border between 3D and 4D, so that sometimes they are visible to normal human sight and at other times they are invisible to our great bewilderment. What say the Probert controls? The subject of the interior of the Earth and the Dirus came up a few times at the early Mark Probert seances in San Diego. Here is what one member of the Inner Circle, Raja Nachash, had to say about it. August 16, 1950. The interior of your Earth is largely hollow. If it became solid, in that moment, what you call your force of gravity would be instantly raised many hundreds of times. You would be mashed to the Earth, nor is the Earth a great mass of fire inside. There are, under the Earth, places where one can live comfortably, and indeed, where he will be relieved of many of his ills. No, he will not find total darkness, for at certain depths there is light, a diffused glow, from rocks and plant life, a kind of phosphorescent light. Do you know where your Christian story of the devil comes from? Many centuries ago, when Atlantis went down, many of her people fled into the caves. They stayed down there for many generations, and now their skin did not turn red like your pictures of the old boy, but rather an extreme white and tones of green. This was brought about by the lack of ultraviolet rays of the sun, and the green was due to absorption from minerals below the surface. From time to time, these individuals came to the surface. Some unintentionally came on a surface opening and were seen by the superstitious people of certain sections. And being so different in appearance, you can imagine the fright this created in those who saw them. Most of their hair on their body had completely disappeared. Their eyes had grown smaller due to the lack of light and of vitamins from sun-grown vegetables. That which I was speaking of was the origin of your Diru. Some of those who went underground morally degenerated, and with more degeneration went physical degeneration. That always follows, doesn't it? Some of them are quite like your Australian Bushmen. There are some races that are quite out of fashion and have been extinct for many thousands of years. You should try to meet some of your fond ancestors. They will look quite badly in a tuxedo or formal evening dress. Cavern comment by the Yada D. Shiite. In March 1953, Meade Lane had finished reading Robert Ernest Dickoff's little 125-page book, Agrathar, available then from Dickoff for $2.50, 315 East 107th Street, New York 29. Dickoff wrote knowingly of the Tasha Lama and its underground city of Agrathar, of the great tunnel system drilled through Earth by a race of pre-glacial Martians, of the evil serpent race who walked on 2 feet, erect as humans, and of Rainbow City in the Antarctic. After reading this mishmash of occult lore, Meade went to his fount of all wisdom, the Inner Circle, for comment and received this surprising reply from the Yada. It is true that the serpent race once overran this planet and that they came from Venus. They abandoned it because conditions here were not favorable to them. They were of a great size and had scaly bodies and large frog eyes and were advanced mentally. Morally, they were not evolved, but were extremely cruel and vicious. They are still to be found in the interior of Venus. The Venetians of present day, however, are not descendants of this earlier type. Venetians visiting your Earth at present want to bring peace. They have no desire to occupy Earth. Most of what Dr. Dickoff says about the tunneling system is correct. These were constructed by Atlanteans, partly for communication, sometimes in connection with the search for metals or ores. The tunnels themselves were not primarily designed for underground living, but in many cases they led into vast caverns, natural and artificially hollowed out, where a great number of persons spent all their lives. It is true that the tunnel opening under the pyramid at Giza leads into the caverns under Tibet. As to size, a common diameter of these tunnels was about 150 feet. They were constructed by mechanical or chemical means. That is, by the application of superheat deteriorators. It was like burning their way through Earth. Yes, it resembled the heat of the atomic bomb. If such heat could be controlled and directed, it was a very dangerous process, for if the heat blast went out of control, the whole globe might suffer most serious consequences. The process was very rapid. The molecules disintegrated. The substance of the Earth is very porous and the gases were largely absorbed by it. Tibetan Lama Lhasa and Roman Catholic Rome. In some quarters, much is still known about these tunnels. The two great religious hierarchies of your plane have such knowledge and in fact have stored great supplies of food in underground depots. They are aware of the approach of their twilight hour. Here you have a prophecy by the Yada which had already come true for the corrupt, organized priesthood of Lhasa and Agrata. Their surface organization has been shattered by the Chinese communists, so it is difficult to believe that the wily old Tasha Lama has been smoked out of his underground lair, Agrata. The catacombs beneath the Vatican in Rome are certainly no secret, but the Yada hint that these connect with the Cavern world may be something of a surprise. The church has had a stranglehold on Malta for hundreds of years with dozens of churches and cathedrals. On the little 12-mile island, and at least one male member of every family in the priesthood. The one God of the world of matter is the God of change, concluded Yada. All things move into and out of manifestation in the three dimensions. Where does form come from? Mind built it and will change it according to the need for change. The object lost in the three dimensions still holds form on another plane. To know this and know that, we know it, is to escape much sorrow when forms of cherished things, beloved persons, vanish